something pretty cool. This came up, and I think oftentimes what we choose to share and teach and lip is very connected to like, what is the coolest insights, that's relevant to what's happening today, challenges, insights that would help you. And this is something that's coming up a lot, which is what really changed when it comes to work because of COVID. I think obviously when it comes to hygiene, there's habits and things we built. We probably wash hands now more than ever before, right? And think of everything as carrying germs more than ever before. But putting that aside, what changed? And I put this image here because it's not about Zoom. It's not about video conferencing. So what actually changed because of COVID? And can we get to not the symptomatic changes, but to the root changes? So there's a two-part presentation. So this is part one of the two parts. The first thing we're going to talk about is kind of what it is not. And when I say what it is not, a lot of changes we look at are symptoms of something else changing. So, work from home, office, or hybrid, right? On one hand, like they all existed before, but there's like a greater adoption and now predictions and discussion about it. Commuting time, like now we work from home and we cut out commuting time. Work-life balance, whether you like it or not. A lot of people with children say it's kind of been tougher, but people without children say it's been great. Work-life balance, family time, a lot of discussion on burnout. Last week we covered a topic that I think was pretty well received and popular with people, like burnout, like what's happening and feeling burnt out. It's not these things. And when I say it's not these things, how do you get to the root elements of what has changed? So let me give you the punchline. In the military, they call the bluff, bottom line up front, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail. So two things that were fundamental root changes that occurred, triggered by COVID, right? And I would say accelerated the change that was occurring. One is tied to this 100-year change in how people work. The value of people. There was when we had met the founder and creator of Alexa, as well as the founder of IBM Watson, they talked about the fundamental unique skill that a human brings. The ability to invent, the ability to create something that did not exist before is a fundamental human strength. Where machines are superior to humans is doing anything predictable, anything repetitive over and over again with greater accuracy. That difference has accelerated and is showing up at a whole different level. It's a century change, industrial age, 20th century to the information era, 21st century, but that accelerated. We'll talk about this insight a little bit more. The second one is tied to habits. And I think many of us have not seen nor understood, as in lack of self-awareness in this area, of what the work environment did in terms of creating habits for us when it comes to work versus, bad habits, good habits, and what it did. So there's kind of March 2020, COVID sort of at a global level really created lockdowns for us. China started a little bit earlier, right? By May 2021, which is a little more than a year now, this little wedge is representative of how work has changed even in this window. I think when COVID first occurred, one of the common themes that showed up in media, that showed up in sort of the press, was all around the surprise of leaders in almost every industry of how productive their people were as they started working from home.
It's interesting because a lot of people in the chat, you guys are all talking about the lack of social interaction has been a really big part of what's changed, right? And what changed at work, this lack of integration with other people and social connectiveness and networking and yes, without question, like remote onboarding, my God, is it different?
I would actually argue all of that in two.
I agree, yes.
Right?
So that's where I think,
so we're going to cover that in two, but on the first one, this idea that low to no ambiguity work. Work where there's a high sense of repetitiveness. Those types of work, by the way, have higher accuracy rates. They have higher productivity. And when I say low variability, the difference between an average worker and a great one is not that great. And so let me just explain what I mean. If you're doing data entry, or say you're moving boxes, right? If you had to move boxes from one room to another, the person moving an average amount an average worker to a great worker. The difference is a couple boxes, but it's not that great. Where the flip side is this: work that has high ambiguity, a lot of uncertainty, and the variability is much greater. When it comes to invention, innovation, creation, average creation is usually worth zero. Great inventions can be worth everything. So the variability of what shows up, of someone who has a mediocre idea, average idea, that usually won't even get noticed, right? No one even engages, to a great one. The difference in the two is very big. The work is much more ambiguous. And what's interesting about burnout is this: we burn out. One of the things that shows up in research is when you make an investment of effort of your time and you don't get return. Mm-hmm. The continual investment of your time and energy, but not feeling good, not feeling productive, leads to burnout. As the amount of
that's the progress and momentum. When you're not making progress and you're not feeling momentum, but you're putting a lot of energy in.
These two wedges are representative of what most companies are facing, no matter what industry. The decisions and strategies that were set before COVID allowed people to get productive pretty quickly. But as that predictable work has been done and cranked through and it'll come down to very low levels, there's a greater amount of this open-ended, we need new strategy, new decisions, new ideas to go pursue. And that work is in abundance. Mm-hmm. And so this shift is something that is represented, we'll go into this a little bit more detail, of a bigger 100-year shift that's been occurring at work. Mm-hmm. Going into habits really quick. What's interesting about culture, people talk about culture a lot. In the office, most people do not recognize the level of intentionality, the deliberate nature that the environment in the office is set up. And this has been iterated over years. If you think of someone who's in charge of office operations, it's not like they come and say, what should I do? They look for best practices. They talk to vendors. What are other companies doing? And the details they go through of, do we, provide X flavors of coffee? Do we provide, maybe not half and half, it's not as healthy. Do we go 1% milk? The intentionality from a health perspective, where you put things, to position furniture, food, snacks, doorways, whether it's office supplies, everything is set up with a greater degree of intentionality than most people realize. And companies with the strongest cultures do a better job at this. Companies with weak cultures kind of leave it up to whatever shows up.
And Simon Priest is mentioning this a few times too, that innovation needs informal communication, like bouncing ideas off. And then COVID working leads to high ambiguity, leading to stress and burnout, as there's no informal communication to discuss ideas.
So this is where 1 and 2 connect. Yep. Like the punchline on some of that is we're talking about the notion of habits, but there's a difference between what we will call body habits versus mind habits. Habits that you need to think better, habits you need to help you go and attack ambiguous, open field, open-ended problems, to then go and invent solutions that can get yourself and others productive. And to do that repeatedly, not just once, repeatedly, that is something that had to have changed in cultures anyways in the office. But when we went home, you're talking about sort of a bad on bad. The thing with cultures and habits is this: we don't often recognize what was there in place until it's missing.
We're not even aware.
We're not even aware the role the environment is playing in making us just build natural habits, both good and bad. Like best cultures, best environments help you naturally reduce the bad habits and naturally increase the good habits as an entire collective body of people called team. Bad cultures, no setup, oftentimes the wrong things happen. And so we'll talk about this a little bit as well. And what happens for a lot of companies is that they're not understanding, in individuals, the unintentional nature of when you just went to your home, what changed in the environment from office to home. And it was not about commuting. It was not about that you don't have to get dressed and dry cleaning. And as companies try to focus on setting up and helping influence the environment. What's tough is this, it's not in their control. And it's harder to influence how someone will set up their home. You can try, but it's still something that's very different than something that's been done in a physical one spot, one space, which is the office building. So we're going to talk about this both in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start off by sharing this piece here. This is from an individual. It's an entrepreneur who started a couple of businesses. And he talks about there are two types of people in this world. People who work hard for a long time and people who work smart for a short time. Obviously, we want to be the latter. And they out-earn the hard workers by 10x, right? I want you all want that. Work a shorter amount of hours and just literally more productive by 10x. This is the first one, is what we call manpower. Manpower is a term we still use a lot. It comes from the industrial age, where head count meant the more heads you have, the more you produced. Versus what has changed is we're now onto brain power. Brain power does not work the same way. When you put more brains together, does not mean that you get better work. Oftentimes it does the reverse. When it comes to creation, when it comes to invention, just adding more people in there oftentimes increases the amount of noise and things get worse. Roger Martin is an individual that we've spent a lot of time with over the years as well. And he wrote a recent post, and I want you to read what he wrote here. So maybe Chris, can you give me a thumbs up once you read this? Right? So here's what's interesting. Routine work, right? Routine work used to be 90%, some would say even a bigger percent, where decision-making creativity was really left for the top 2%, maybe even less in the company, what they call senior executives. Then there was all the workers. What they're seeing is this: at this juncture, 40% of almost all work is what would be done in the industrial age by the people at the very top. That creative invention, decision-making, navigating complete uncertainty, 40%. And that number is a number that tripled recently and is rising faster and faster. There's a podcast I listened to, and I was searching for it, like trying to listen to re-find it. It was awesome, but I couldn't find it. So I'm just going to tell you what it said. It talked about how work that has low ambiguity, work that's predictable, is moving downstream at such a rapid rate to basically lower paid people. Even when it comes to things like coding, when it comes to things like legal work, anything that has a level of predictability is being moved down to lower income people. And oftentimes offshore work and outsourcing. And then that work is moving at such a rapid rate to AI and tech automation, which is creating a cost of near zero. Once you put the tech in place, it's turning the cost to near zero. That work has been shifting in the course of 100 years. What COVID did at a global level is gave every company this massive wake-up call to giving them a runway to get everyone productive first, because everyone was scared about this massive change. And once they ran out and started to run out of the low ambiguous, what you could feel productive on, what was left was this high ambiguity, right? Uncertain, don't know what to do, but someone's got to figure out how to make calls and forward momentum the organization or teams. That's the work that's left.
Well, it's crazy. You think about how many industries are being disrupted right now, right? Like things like, I mean, even in this article, it talks about retail, healthcare, obviously education. And if you look at, you can see in professional jobs, lawyers, doctors, accountants, all the jobs, right, are now moving in this direction, where I think we always thought certain jobs would just have more predictability, but it doesn't. It's scary.
I think it's almost like if you took a laser beam or an X-Acto knife and you started dissecting your job and your work into what part of it is fairly brain dead, routine, and what part of it is not. I think you'll be scared when you see that, wait, my week was a lot routine, which means most of that is going to lower pay people and quickly to tech automation. Then what you have to learn the skills of, the upskilling that everyone keeps talking about, is learning how to navigate this unknown and how to do it fast.
Well, but back to
it's like the doing work versus the thinking work.
Well, so because Monica, I like what you said a few minutes back. She said I was feeling totally unproductive at my job, so that I was totally burned out and demotivated. Unproductive made you feel burned out and demotivated, but the being unproductive, I think we think various reasons why we feel unproductive, but we're trying to peel it back to the root of why you're unproductive is that there's a lot less clear work of what to do. Yes. So you feel unproductive, but it's sort of not always waiting for somebody to come up with what you should do. But at the end of the day, it's that ambiguity of I don't know what to be doing, or nobody's giving me clarity, or I don't have clarity. So I think we feel like then you don't do it. It's such a hard thing to learn.
Like we refer to this as defense versus offense. Yeah. Defense being like, a lot of our jobs are just fire drills and you have to go and address fire drills. But even then, fire drills tend to have a repeated nature. And so at some point you can innovate to permanently remove the fire drills that keep recurring on a repeated basis by getting to the root. Offense is literally exactly as it sounds. You look forward, open slate, and what do I do? And the amount that you have to do. So we've been talking about developmental GPS, right? We talked about 3-5, which is a foundation, which is all around the notion of discipline, the hard stuff combined with like kind of the truth. But once you master this foundation, where we all want to get to is what we call the 1-2-4, which is thinking to then being creative. And that combination of how do I strategize? How do I think better? And then how do I strike with the best ideas? Not once, but consistently, because most times you'll see one good idea isn't enough. You need to adjust it. So you have to think of even the speed that you have to be able to move in that field. It's a different change in work. Yeah. And I think if it wasn't a scary wake-up call, watching all the things with AI and the trends and the research reports and the automation of every job, for a while engineers are like, well, you need engineers forever, we're safe. Oh no, you go to India now, you watch the outsourced engineers, they're being automated at such a fast rate too. It's getting really scary that anything repetitive is moving down to lower pay and then to automation. Yeah, so what's left though is the job that only human beings can do well.
And Heidi, you were saying, okay, so she's just adding into it, but this idea, she said unproductive and unappreciated for the work and innovation being proposed. I assume, Heidi, you were talking about you're proposing innovation and it's getting resistance, but.
Well, so can I tell you what's interesting is that there's two different parts. You can feel underappreciated for cranking through a ton of low ambiguity work, right? And there's an expectation, like just get that done. And then there's a part where I am trying to innovate. I've got some ideas. I want to propose this. Well, see the difference between a good idea and a bad one, right? Once again, the variability is massive, right? Meaning like a lot of people have ideas, but they're not good. Yeah. A lot of us have a lot of bad ideas and you want to try it, but it's not school. There's a cost. There's a cost to trying something and not working. Right. And so this notion of how do I, gated process test stuff. I mean, it's almost like having a laboratory.
Yeah, you're right. Because you're saying
I love experimenting in the lab.
Feeling unproductive after trying to think outside the box, propose ideas and not being acknowledged. So people give up. But it's like you're saying, maybe the ideas are really bad because we're not good at it. Because it's not a skill we have, right?
I think about the scientists who invented the vaccines for COVID. They were like really small teams of 2 people, like 3 people, very small teams. Right. A lot of people went into labs and tried to come up with vaccines for COVID. And so just because you get to go to the lab and mix some stuff and blow up test tubes and whatnot, I want to feel appreciated. I hope you can see that's the challenge with innovation. They say the definition of an experiment is that it should have in excess of 90-something% failure. You won't be appreciated when it's failing. And so that's the part that's tough, which is why we gravitate towards clear work.
Or not learning the skills to try and experiment in some kind of gated fashion where Petri dishes where it can explode, but you're actually learning and iterating to make that experiment or that innovation actually happen.
So there's something interesting. We were talking, I was reading this article this morning about, autopilot, kind of Tesla and sort of all the different cars now building more and more autonomous driving. And it was interesting where like all the stuff was talking about how much they like driving now. This individual is going to a gym 20 minutes further away, because instead of having to go in the car and like, drive and pay attention, they get to go in and just veg out. So maybe that's their time for a quick snooze. Imagine cars where like kind of like planes, you have a table that folds out, and going into the car as the driver with my breakfast and a fork and knife, because I like, that's where I'm just going to eat. Like this notion that even driving and the repetitive nature of it, tech is about to automate. We're saying by the time our kids get old, they might not get licenses.
I was thinking maybe
they may not get cars if you have the Ubers and whatnot. But even if they have their old car, if you're old enough, remember Kit from
Knight Rider.
Knight Rider.
Knight Rider.
Right? I was saying like I don't think Kit ever parked. Right? It's a car. It's an automated car. Knight Rider would be like, "Hey, Kit, pick me up here," and like this notion that shows up, drives, you just fall asleep. This notion of how much is changing and how much tech is taking anything that has a degree of predictability and removing it. So this is a big change. And COVID just showed every company what happens when you crank through all the clear work and then what's left. And a year later, this is a huge issue that I think companies are not realizing. We coach and mentor a lot of senior leaders across industries. They can't even articulate this problem they're facing. They need people to navigate the ambiguous, and they don't know how to even articulate that, which is now going to connect into the second part. So there's an individual by the name of James Clear who wrote a book called Atomic Habits. I'm going to play 2 parts of the podcast, which is interesting. So just short little windows, but I'll let you listen to this.
But actually, there's a real spiritual component to the book I found, because you're helping people, you're actually helping us understand ourselves better. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that any of us can give another human being, is the ability to understand themselves.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think, behaviors, this is, I think, one of the common myths about behavior change. People say, behavior change is so hard, it's so difficult to change habits, whatever. The truth is we're changing all the time. One of the primary functions of your brain is to change your behavior whenever the environment shifts or whenever the context shifts. So you're very capable of change, and you're kind of doing it constantly. However, in order to change in an intentional way, in order to be in control of that change and not just having it happen to you, I think you have to start with some kind of awareness. So the point that you just made about the book is actually about self-awareness. It's actually about understanding yourself better. It's actually about seeing some of the behaviors that you're usually blind to. That I feel like is an essential first step if you want to be in control of that process in any way. A lot of people feel like they're the victim of their habits, but I think if you want to become the architect of them, you need to have some kind of self-awareness. You need to be able to identify, what am I actually doing right now? What is the truth of the situation? And where do I want to go? What is the truth of what I want to become or want to achieve? And then you can start to bridge that gap once you have a better, clearer understanding of where you currently stand and where you want to go.
All right. So this is one part, right? So very interesting.
I love the architect of our behaviors, our habits, versus the victim too. That was part 1.
Megan's going to buy me a few seconds to find the next part.
Sorry, I was just laughing about Karen saying her friend's kids never written a check or seeing an icon for a rotary phone. Yes, we're old.
But can I tell you what I love? This idea that we all talk about habits are so difficult to build, habits are difficult to change. Yeah. And yet it happens automatically when something changes in the environment. Yeah. And obviously COVID gave a global experiment to a massive environmental change. But this notion of self-awareness, most of us were not aware, right? Besides the obvious things of I don't have to have dry cleaning bills or commute as much, and I can spend time with my family right here and whatnot. But there were many things that we were not aware that was automatically baked into the environment that an office produced. Offices are built for a certain level of productivity. Now, mind you, most cultures and offices are built for what I would call the 20th century manpower productivity. Right. But some of the best ones are built for brain power productivity. But regardless, as a body of people, there were deliberate and intentional cultural setups that were built in place for driving the more good habits, less bad habits. And suddenly you go to environments at home, we all built habits. It might be even how you eat. a lot of us, I think that one of the worst habits is we start snacking too much when we went home, right? The food was way too close. We weren't prepared, and there were all these other things that occurred. And so just recognizing that is one of the first things. So I'm going to play one more little clip out of this. I'm going backwards because it's not in this order, but this I thought a little bit more on habits. Just give me.
So I wonder if you could maybe expand upon that a little bit, because I think it's a really interesting concept.
Well, there are a variety of things that influence your outcomes in life. Probably if we were going to say there are like 2 or 3 big pillars, we probably would say, well, there's luck and randomness. So certainly, good luck and bad luck influence your outcomes. There's your choices, individual decisions you make, where to go to school, who to marry, what job to take, what career to pursue. Those certainly influence your outcomes. And then there are your habits and your actions. And, by definition, the first one, luck and randomness, is not under your control. So I don't think it makes sense to focus there because you don't have control over it by definition. Their choices, we could talk more about that possibly, but the one that I've explored the most is your habits. And the reason is because they are decisions, they're also choices, but they're ones that get repeated day in and day out. And I think for that reason, they exert an enormous force on your outcomes in life. And we could potentially, as you just mentioned, sort of boil it down and simplify it and say that your current life today is largely the sum of your habits. In many ways, it's the habits that you've been following for, say, the last 6 months or the last year or the last 2 years that have carried you to whatever results you have right now. I had a friend who told me a couple months ago, I liked the way he phrased it. He said, if you're enjoying good results right now, you were killing it 6 months ago. And I think that speaks to the quality of habits and how they build up and compound. And it's really the process that you've been running. And I like to kind of simplify this down and I use the phrase system versus goal. And so what I say is that, like, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And if we're a little bit more precise about those words, your goal is like your desired outcome. It's your target, the thing that you want to achieve. But what is your system? Your system is the collection of daily habits that you follow. And so each little habit is kind of like a gear in that overall machine. And if you optimize your habits, you're optimizing your system, and you naturally fall to whatever that level of result is, to whatever the system is running toward. If there's ever a gap between your goal and your system, if there's ever a gap between your desired outcome and your daily habits will always win. It doesn't matter how good your intentions were. It doesn't matter what you hope to achieve. It's what your habits are carrying you toward. And so the great irony of all of this is we also badly want better results in life. We also badly want to make more money or to reduce stress or to find love or to be more productive. But the results are actually not the thing that needs to change. It's the system that precedes the results. It's the habits that precede the outcome. So it's kind of like fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves.
Kind of cool, no?
Yeah. If you're enjoying good results right now, you were killing it 6 months ago, but yet human behavior is so hard to think about 6 months from now, right? But that's exactly what it is. It takes time.
This slide coming back of and what's fascinating is this, I'm going to touch on Roger Martin combined with James Clear. They're talking on one side, but you need both parts of the equation. The first part is just recognizing work is moving at such a rapid rate that if you do not know how to tackle and navigate ambiguity, you're gonna have no job. I mean, that's where it's trending very fast. The flip side is this, and this is the idea of being aware. We were not aware of this environment change, and the office was set up with a certain level of teams of people putting mind share over years to set you up for a certain type of productivity, a level of productivity, change environment rapidly. And it's not just about having a desk and getting your monitor at a certain height so your back doesn't hurt. There's a lot of things that we're not even aware that was there that's not there anymore. And so it's interesting what James talked about, right? The 3 things that are drivers of success in life. I'm going to put it in this order: luck and randomness versus your choices, which is really decision making, versus your habits. And I put on the right side the pyramid of James Clear versus Roger Martin, both talk about the other side, but very lightly.
Mhm.
And I think this is where we found often authors, researchers don't recognize life really requires, they have a piece of the puzzle. No author or expert we've ever met seem to have the whole puzzle, but they have a piece of it. And they talk about their piece being the most important piece. And we found it's not true. Like, we as human beings need to know which are the noise, throw those pieces out, and which are the signal pieces, and you have to piece the puzzle together. James Clear talked about their choices, but he doesn't go into depth there. He focuses on habits as if that's the most important piece. Roger Martin does the flip side. He talks about the foundation of good decision-making, creativity, innovation is actually rigor and discipline, but he barely touches on what rigor and discipline is. And so you're seeing both sides touch on the other part, but when you don't connect it,
Yeah.
also things get built the wrong way.
They wonder what VC PE is. Just so you know, VC is venture capital, PE is private equity. The reason why we put this here is their business model, not the large financial institutions, but more small, like venture capital, private equity.
Actually, there are very large venture capital.
There
private
are
equity.
very large ones.
No,
yeah.
the difference of companies like JP Morgan Chase, or companies generally who invest in public markets, they are all about habits, and they're all about choices, decision making,
Yeah.
analytics, equity analysts, researching. But when you think about what a venture capitalist or private equity firm does, they're betting on the next new thing. And when you actually go and peel back their strategy, a lot of it, and you hear a lot of them talk on stage, they attribute most things to timing, to like luck, to randomness, that what I thought would work didn't work. And so when you listen to them, it feels and almost sounds like their core strategy, despite what language they may flower it with, is kind of luck and randomness, and being masters of that. And they always say, by the way, luck and random is not quite luck and random. Good luck comes to those who are best prepared for it.
Those are ready.
If you don't have the bandwidth and the ability to strike when something good happens and recognize it, it's like how people can take advantage of momentum and accelerate that momentum. We call that baby mo, which is mini momentum, to turn it into adult mo, right? The ability to do that is...
Opportunities come your way all the time.
Absolutely.
But you might not see them because you're not set up to be able to see them, right? Because you're buried in something. Or, right, you don't have the ability to, one of our messages used to say, prosecute the opportunity.
Yes.
Your ability to actually prosecute it, as an execute at the highest level, but things are there, right? But it's like it's a skill that's missing. And I think that's the part where if your habits are set up the right way, you're more likely to see those offensive plays.
But
right?
also the idea of randomness, so many of the best things literally get discovered by accident, right? Like, Slack was not actually built to be Slack. They were a different company, and they built a tool just to help communicate each other. That became what survived and became a company.
I like what Katie Poe is saying. Invention is desire meeting a prepared mind, meaning you have to be prepared for a prepared mind, meaning you're set up, right? Like you have good habits and rituals.
You know, one of the, I know, for example, Monica, you're in a startup, and I'm assuming you're not at this stage yet, but one of the things, one of our advisors, he's a self-made billionaire, he actually shared with me was this: when you build a company, if you don't get to a place where you have the ability to literally make a huge bet, and in the tune of 5 million, meaning you should be able to make a $5 million bet that you can lose all of it. And if you have the ability to take that kind of risk, you're gonna be able to jump on opportunities in ways that other people cannot. That is a place you build up to, right? You build up to squirreling away, saving, being profitable. This is not borrowed money or money that you're burning, money losing and then betting more. It's having the ability to have that kind of, it's like when we say rainy day fund.
Yeah.
It's an R&D fund that you can make a bet at that size and be okay, right? You won't go out of business going down to zero on that kind of bet. And more, how many of those you can make is a sense of you're prepared for the luck, for the randomness. On the flip side, bad luck, right? Bad things happening. Can you survive it? Can you weather an accidental bad luck? And that's also something that is not quite so random, not quite so, driven by, luck and randomness and fairy dust. Number one, it's interesting when you look at it. My thesis is the greatest mentoring and coaching VC and private equity investors should do is help companies understand how to set up 1 and 2. It's where if you think of mentorship done in scale, mentorship professionalized and institutionalized, it's the ability to teach people 1 and 2 so that they can then go and attack when 3 happens. Or when bad happens, they also can adjust and survive to live another day. Talking of habits, it's interesting. When you look at everything that's really written about habits, if you take a dance class, for the longest time, I'm not a dancer, so I kind of am now, but I'm not a full dancer yet, but they talk about the half step and it always confused me, right? It's like they do these
5 and 6
right.
and 7.
It's like an 8 count usually,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like 5 and 6, but I was like, if you throw 5 and 6, you're throwing an extra number in. Isn't that like a 9 count now? And they do this like and step, and I'm like
5 and 6.
I'm so confused because
and...
you're speaking at a tempo that sounds like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay.
But anyway, my point is this. When you think of good habits or bad habits, it's like the half step in a dance. For those of you who are dancers, you know what I'm talking about now. But if you're not, it's like a boom, boom. It's a step 1, step 2.
Yeah.
It's a 1, 2.
Yeah.
And they occur so
Very
fast.
close together.
Good habits, right? What you're doing is you are taking an action, good action, and it leads to a micro reward. Bad habits, you're taking this is how you break bad habits, action and something bad, and you need to get a micro penalty. And the reason why these are important is this: the human brain is a pattern recognition machine. We recognize patterns. When you start associating, like I think, for example, Megan works out on the weekend and she knows after the workout, she gets to have an acai bowl. Literally, as she does the workout, is coming to a close, she can taste the acai bowl.
And I won't have it unless I work out.
Like this notion of turning things that you do anyways, but turning it into a micro reward for yourself. That pattern, as it gets associated, makes you actually put it's not like workout and then acai bowl. It's literally workout acai bowl.
Yes.
It's like a
1-2. It's like goes together. Sorry, before you go on, Mike Collette was asking, sorry if I missed this, but aren't habits a decision? Because changing your habits is a decision,
Yes,
whether you're creating good or trying to
Now,
break that.
on one hand, yes. The other hand, no. Because once again, we can, like, in theory, you can slice these things. And I've heard in theory, people say that you can't break bad habits.
You can only create better, replace the bad with
Put
good.
all the theory aside. And anyone wants to, let's have some red wine and discuss this to death. But when I think about in practicality, in practice, right? This question of, is a habit a decision? To start, yes. But as you do this repeatedly, a pattern, when it gets baked into your automatic, so that it's no longer happening through an intentional, deliberate, conscious effort, but it's happening almost like a knee-jerk reaction. At that point, I would not call that a decision.
Right.
I would call that baked into your automatic.
You don't even have to think about it, so it's not a decision. But yes.
Versus a decision being something you have to deliberately choose to do. You have to put mental energy to say, go do this. When something is baked into your automatic, this is what we usually do not consider a decision.
Habits, unconscious decisions. Yes, once it gets there. Of course, it starts conscious, right? It's like, I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to not eat this, or I'm going to.
But I think what people don't understand, we did a lot of work with some of the best to-date experts understanding the human brain. We pattern associate at such a fast rate, you'd be shocked if you understood the power of that, right? Like just tiny good gets you a tiny reward, right? Something we already do anyways, right? In the same way, a tiny bad, right? And remember, the accumulation of the tiny goods is really good over time, right? That's 6 months ago, producing great results now. Accumulation of tiny bads equals really bad things happening later. This negative association, a micro penalty. And a micro penalty can be as small as a teammate calling out something that just feels icky. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yes, Charlie was calling me Jesus for a little while because I was bearing the cross of everybody's sins and allow me to carry, and blame myself for, I don't want to be called that, right? Like, and you just find ways to remind that penalty, that negative association I have every time I'm about to blame myself.
Jesus being Spanish for Jesus, right? So
sorry,
taking the burden of everyone's cross, right?
Yes. So I was like, I don't like that, right? Is that association with that I don't like.
And the thing that
when
happens
I'm about
is
to
this.
do it, it's like, wait, I know what he's about to say, so don't do it. I mean, it's like the Pavlov's dog, right?
Think of the thing when we get in trouble, right? The things
Yeah.
that teachers, parents, authority figures have said no to, yelled us on.
Mhm.
What ends up happening is that the pattern builds so fast. Usually it's
It's
like
so fast.
second time, almost
Yeah.
third time.
Mhm.
That before you're about to do it, you already know what the penalty is, their response is, so you bite your tongue.
Mhm.
You cut yourself off.
Mhm.
Recognizing that, you have the ability to break bad habits by building in a micro penalty. Now, one of the most common interesting tidbits
Yeah.
that occurs across almost every researcher is this, and this is something that I can't wait for the research to move in this. Almost all books, all experts, all researchers are written with the mindset of functioning solo.
Yeah.
Very few have figured out that when you move into this 21st century, team beats solo like 6 ways to Sunday over and over again. And the notion of understanding good habit building, bad habit building at a team level
Yeah.
is a very different job,
Yeah.
and even a better job than we focus on good habit, bad building at a solo level.
Yeah.
Think of the stuff that we think about when we think of good and bad habits. You think about yourself. You don't think about the notion of team, and the smallest unit of team is two people or more together, right? We go 2 to 4, and then we try to hit around 10-ish. At that size, imagine trying to build good habits together,
Yep.
break habits that are bad together.
So Greg was asking on the earning the micro reward, right? Can you talk more about that? Because some of our good habits often don't feel good. Yes, in the moment they're hard, they're painful. Idea being to come with creative small rewards that we reward ourselves immediately afterwards. He's asking.
Excellent question. So first, this is one of the most common mistakes. People want to jump straight to good habits, right? And I have a slide after this, which is literally a garden. If you like gardening, there's like the notion of weeds and just plants over garden plots just make everything suffocate and not really grow. So the notion of you have to first create the space, which is why dial down the bad habits before you create good habits. This is one of the most common in practice errors. People try to just shove their way to more good stuff, right? Just add more. We shared this way back in lip number 8, right? Sorry, I see we're like shifted over.
Are we shifted? Does it keep
The
moving?
camera, sorry.
Oh my God, it might be moving. It was
Okay.
my setup.
But if you remember this slide, this notion of what changed from the 20th to 21st century, right? Working harder, why you had supervisors versus working smarter, why you would have a coach. It's different. It's what we call the difference between manpower and brain power. So before COVID, the objective still in most companies was to do a lot of work, right? And I capitalized body habits. We had a lot of emphasis and still do. When we think habits, we think about sleep, exercise. And when it comes to the mind, it usually goes into reading, maybe meditation. Some people have a habit of talking to someone. You can hire someone like therapy. Like you talk about habits in this nature. And what I would say is this is where the mind is in service to the body. On the flip side, and this is where after COVID, the objective is to see the value at a vastly different level to thinking work. The body habit is table stakes. The need to be able to take care of your physical body through sleep, or so exercise, nutrition, sleep, it's table stakes. It's a given. The mind habits. How do I dial down the things that hurt my mind? How do I dial up the thing that fuels my mind? Well, what does that even mean, right? How do I dial down the things that like make me feel shame, desperate, reckless, anxious, whatever it might be? And how do I dial up the things that give me courage, that give me calm when it's a hurricane force stuff happening, to find clarity and to find signal when there's so much noise? How do I build these habits in the right way? We talked before about this notion of habit of ferocity, right? How do you build a habit that not a physical hill, but when we see a mental hill, we train ourselves to be able to run into it as opposed to slow down. This notion of the body being in service to the mind. And what's fascinating, we're talking right before this class, was this. You know, even in physical sports, basketball, football, I mean, such a physical body sport, you're thinking it's all about the body, right? You work on the mind simply so that the body can function, build stronger muscles, right? Should you spend the bulk of your time actually focusing on muscle building, right? drinking like muscle milk. And I mean, it's literally a physical sport. Yet when you look at the best in the world, LeBron James, Tom Brady, they're spending now close to half, if not more of their time on working on their mind. When we worked for the military, did a lot of work for the military and still do. We first went in, going back to 2015, like, I mean, these are badass people, like shooting guns, firing bombs, right? Everything must be pumping chests and just like learning how to like assemble the gun faster, shoot better. I just figure like, it's like somewhere between an arcade game and just arm wrestling matches everywhere in the mud. Not true. Like half of it was like learning history and mental training and resiliency training.
Yeah.
And I believe that that percentage is going to shift to be far greater on the side of the mind.
Yeah, we're saying that the body work and the physical sports or physical work is table stakes, meaning you have to have that, right? Like in basketball, you have to have the footwork and dribbling. You can't be amazing at what you're doing. You can't be a great player if you don't have that. Then you have to work on the mind. And what it's saying is everything is shifting more. So you just have to have that body work. Like that's a given. Like that has to be part of the of your setup, of your automatic, but the mental work is where it's all headed, which is fascinating, even for sports, physical sports.
And by the way, a lot of people say, you know, like healthy body, healthy mind notion. Yeah. And this notion of this, I had this conversation with one of our employees saying, if that was truly the case, and that was the absolute truth about you need the body to be that smart and that good, that creative, that would make people in the fitness world the smartest people on this planet, right? They would be the inventors of the new iPhones and autonomous driving. And they would literally be the CEOs of every company ever created because they are so fit when it comes to physical, nutrition, sleep. It's not true. It's not true where you'll recognize at some point what we need in the physical body is a lot less than you think. And we have more than you realize. We can always get better, but it's the mind that we're falling short. Megan and I get invited quite often over the years to give talks in wellness conferences just around the world. Go back 10, 15 years, they wanted to hear how we gamified our employees to work out more, how we actually got people to eat healthier, the sleep class work we did. But in the last 5 years, they asked us to come talk, not anything about physical health. They wanted to know about mental health. They want to know how we got people to talk about and get coached on the terror that's going in their mind, and how do you institutionalize and scale mentoring and coaching and getting people to go there and the real stuff. That's what they want to talk about. And if you look at wellness conferences and you look at even the costs in the healthcare bills for the biggest of companies, it shifted to actually costing more on mental health issues than on physical health. They're both there, but it's now dwarfed by the challenges of the mind.
Let's give them the teaser to next week so we can talk about it a little bit if you want to stay with us, but just because it's almost one. My
dad's one of the top, most famous farmers in corn in the world. This is what a garden that's not weeded looks like. This notion that you need to learn how to dial down your bed. You can't just keep planting. It needs the space, the oxygen to grow. And so weeding, dialing down bad, is what comes before you can dial up some create new ones. Okay, so this was
Is
what
this
we were
awesome,
gonna,
you guys? Wait till you see
this
this.
is very
Sorry,
cool.
wait till you see this.
So if you ever like the show, if there's one show, I mean,
One of
that's
the
just
best shows
kick-ass
of
to
all
watch.
time. Okay?
Breaking Bad, which by the way, and so this is literally the exact slide we picked. This is not made
Does
up.
anybody notice two numbers that sound familiar, look familiar with what we've been teaching for the last at
This
least
is like
8 weeks
one of those
in the
like
Dev GPS?
sometimes when brilliance just
And
strikes.
it just happened to be
3-5.
5.
I do not understand how BR and
If you're
3-5.
new with us, then Chris Kelly is saying 3-5. If you're new, the 3-5 is part of this developmental GPS we created. 3 is all the discipline and all the good habits, and 5 is all the truth, feedback, like just real. 3-5. We've been emphasizing 3-5 happens to be.
Breaking
But
Bad,
We're
right?
going to also talk about creating
Like
good
literally,
habits, huh?
just so you know, that's you go Google search that 3-5 is right there. We saw it and we're like, you know what? It's
we
like
wanted
everything's
that to be our
aligning.
title for today. I'm like, oh, how do we force this in? But it's not quite right.
Next week's presentation.
Next week.
This
yeah.
is part 2.
Mhm.
We're going to go into the notion of, once again, not body habits, but mind habits. We're going to go into depth, in practice, the detail of how do you set up so that you have the ability to push your mind harder than recognizing the ways we oscillate. I'll give you a little teaser into 2 slides of it. One is the notion, this slides we shared before. The orange is the automatic, The yellow is the deliberate. That question, I think,
Yeah.
on Mike, about
Yeah.
decisions,
Yeah.
right? When you think about strategy, when you think about the Dev GPS 1, 2, 4, right? How do you think, and then how do you strike with creativity? That is the yellow box, which, by the way, you cannot win. You cannot succeed just by doing the James Clear habits. You need to do the Roger Martin decision-making part, creative part. That yellow sleeve is what you need to become great. But the foundation to do yellow right is you need the red. And here are two things that we found to be fascinating. And this is the error. We talk about, say, from the individual, the self, or even the player, the person, the support, whatever you're coaching. We call it the shame victory speech. You know, when we make a lot of mistakes, repeated mistakes, and people get angry at us about repeated mistakes, you have to recognize it's not you deliberately making the mistake.
Right.
It's coming out of an unconscious bad habit. It's an automatic mistake. It's an automatic error. It's not intentional. And why we call it the shame victory speech, mistakes done over time and the way our teammates and bosses and other people around us treat us make us feel ashamed. And when you feel ashamed, it's like you might as well just drink an entire bottle of Jägermeister. You literally cannot function. It throws your game off that much. It's like being drunk. But the victory speech we need is, wait a sec, I'm not doing it on purpose.
Well, so it's interesting actually, because I think, Kimmy, you had said before, and I wanted to bring it back to this. You said, do you think identifying and addressing the emotional need driven by the automatic response can influence the habit shift change? Meaning, should we think about like why you're doing this and kind of dive into that emotion? And this is a fascinating conversation we had last night. The reality is, on one hand, yes, on the other hand, you know what? It's just a bad habit.
Well,
We've
well,
overdone that part
That's
of it,
right.
which is, why do I do that? And I'm such a bad person, and it comes from my childhood. And there's a part where I think there's always a space for that, but it is so overdone. At some point, you know, I don't think my mother's watching this. With my mom and dad, is a dynamic where, Mom, you're not trying to be mean to dad, but every time he talks about his family, you say this. So it's a 1-2, and it's just a bad habit. You're not bad. Mom, I want to say to my dad, Mom's not trying to be mean to you. It's just a bad habit. Stop doing it. It's literally just a stop doing it. When he says this, you say this. Stop doing it. It's a bad habit. You're not bad. He's not bad. You both have bad habits, as opposed to, oh my God, it just comes so deep. It's like 45 years of marriage, and you know, it just gets so,
well, it
so
goes
heavy.
into, so I know a little bit about,
You know
so
a
the
little bit about
background,
the
there's a little bit of like,
Yeah, you know.
my in-laws were mean to me, and that's why,
It
how
just-
long ago is that? 20 years ago? It's not it.
It's not it.
It's like we attribute a lot of
We
our
want to
bad
talk about it.
habits
It's to that.
to someone,
that
some
happened to me.
experience. It's not. At some point,
It's
it
just a
becomes
bad
so
habit.
automated.
Yeah.
It's a pattern.
You don't
that
even
we need to
realize. You
break.
don't even realize you're doing it unless somebody says you're doing it again, and that's the
So
we're
Megan's
saying
teeing
not
up
the reward,
the
but-
slide, the part on the right, the
Yeah.
coaching error.
Yeah.
This is one of the top parenting, coaching, teacher,
Yeah.
manager, leader errors, right? The top error is this. We actually, if you really peel back, we believe they did it intentionally.
Yes, it's
They made the mistake, right? They deliberately
out to
did
get me.
things again to hurt the team, hurt the company, hurt themselves, deliberate. And so you know what happens when we think they did it deliberately, that yellow sleeve, we work on their mind. So we try to show them the consequence, right, of that mistake. You make them feel bad. You make them feel the cost of it. Explain to them. Well, and that doesn't work, then we flip gears and then we try to make them feel good. Imagine what you would be like if you fix this mistake.
Yes.
So you start to try to get them to be inspired or aspire to be this better person that comes on time, that does this and whatnot. And so we then press on that lever.
Mhm.
Well, when 1 hasn't worked and 2 hasn't worked,
Mhm.
we give up and we just ignore them and we give them silence, right? And at some point, they're not quite sure where they're getting silenced and whatnot. And then at some point, you come back and you rotate back to trying 1,
Mhm.
then you try 2, and then you go back to 3, and then we repeat that cycle
Same
again.
cycle.
And as a coach, as a parent, as an adult, as a leader, we're not recognizing we're pressing on the wrong thing.
And yeah.
The yellow sleeve is the wrong thing to press. Trying to help them peel out their mental, psychological reason for repeatedly making this mistake, which they didn't even know they were doing because they're so unconscious, is the wrong way to do it.
I like what you said, Christy from Cap One. She said some people are so hard on themselves, and that's their excuse for not changing. They're consumed on beating themselves up.
Well, here's a perfect example. I think there's a lot of people, right? that say, I'm sorry, automatically, right?
Just a bad
Something
habit.
happened and say, I'm sorry. And to say, why do you do that? Let's go into where in your life did you take the wrong fork and build this habit of apologizing when you don't even know what went wrong, right? Something went wrong, your first reaction is, I'm sorry. At some point, you're going to come up with a way to attribute it to someone or something. It's still not going to change the fact that you're going to keep doing it.
Right.
And that's the point. At some point, trying to understand why we have this habit, it won't matter as much as you think. Habits occur through patterns. And so it took more than one instance. It might have taken 2, 3, 6, 12. And to go and figure out all 12 still won't do anything. The work you have to do to break the habit is a different form of work than how it got created. And just like it took time for patterns to occur, for you to build a bad habit, it's going to take some repeated nature to break the bad habit and then to insert good ones.
Like for example, my son Matthew, I have an 11-year-old and Brendan is 8. Every time Brendan speaks, almost always, right, says something, it annoys Matthew. Matthew's first reaction is to shut him down. That's not true. Where'd you get that? Like, just, it's like an immediate. Obviously, it came from Brendan's been annoying him for years. So Matthew's learned this behavior to just shut him down. Matthew's not doing it on purpose. He loves his brother. He's actually not trying to be mean. He's not a bad kid. He's not. They love each other. You see them. But there's certain instances where it just feels like Brendan can't get a word in edgewise. It's just a bad habit. So I've reminded Matthew, it's not, you're not intentionally. And finally he was like, you're right. I can see I'm doing that. Okay, so how do we get him to stop? Well, I'm going to start calling him by one of his friends' names that he thinks is very annoying. So every time he does that to his brother Brendan, I'm calling him Luigi, and he hates it because Luigi does that to him at school. So it's like this like bad, what did we call it before? When
Negative
the
association.
negative association. In negative association, he looked at
Patterns,
me like he wanted to, but
At some point,
I can tell
he
he will bite his tongue next time. And now that I keep reminding
and it
him,
shows up.
I finally have something I can do to contribute to it. But as a coach, I have to calm down that he's not purposely trying to make Brendan feel bad. He's not mean. He's not doing it intentional. It is not deliberate. It is just a bad habit. Because when I feel like if he's doing it deliberately, I'm the Italian comes out. I want to scream. I want to, and it just makes, and it's not.
Scream.
Oh yeah. And the problem is not going away. So my husband and I have been racking our brains for like a year trying to figure this. How do we're like, Matthew, we yell at him, does nothing. Make him feel bad, does nothing. It's just a bad habit. And now this kind of shame victory speech, I think about it. I'm like, Matthew, you're not doing this on purpose. It obviously came
Helps
from
Matthew.
a reason.
Yep.
It's helping Matthew. God, I'm not actually just, I love, because I think he does that. I love Brendan. I don't know why I can see him doing that, but and yes, Brendan is annoying you. Why is he annoying you? Don't even have to go into that. Stop doing the 1-2 punch. Like just, so anyways. I'm calling
It's
him
interesting.
Luigi.
As Katie is talking about saying sorry, it's a passive aggressive way to often end an argument or avoid a fight. I'd say maybe, but this is the part, like you're attributing too much of it to a deliberate, intentional thing. Things get baked in and automatic so much.
Yeah, just get used to
That
saying
even when there
sorry.
isn't a conflict, we'll say sorry, assuming there's conflict. Like there's an automated
Yeah.
nature to how we pattern recognize.
We're just like a
And so-
body of habits, like a
but-
bunch of them.
And
they
it's
just
interesting,
grow.
even this example of Matthew, right? In this case,
Yeah.
you will see when people do the right rituals to start to break the habits, bad habits, at some point they will have to it. He will
Yeah.
have to it and bite his tongue because he will start to associate the completion of that resulting in this
And-
micro penalty,
Yeah.
being called something he doesn't want to be called.
Doesn't wanna be
And
called.
as you associate it enough, at some point, as the thought enters your mind, you already know what comes next. It's the half step, 1, 2.
Yeah.
And so because you
Yeah.
don't want the 2, it stops at the 1.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you'll stop literally outwardly doing it or saying it. And as that eventually disappears, you now have the ability to have dialed down that habit. I'll just give you one more slide here. This was a great diagram. It's the reverse representation of ladders of inference, just in the upper right. Ladders of inference is taking a fact or data point, right? Then you mountain on your assumptions on top of it. And then you mountain on your judgment or logic, right? And then the piece they left out is that leads to then a decision. And so another way to look at this is this section in here is what we would call the OOD, observe, orient, and decide, which is kind of what judgment is like what you might do, right? Sense making. And then the outer ring is the decision making, the action. And what ends up happening when we make decisions, as in the green, arc, the decision, we don't share how we started with some tiny little fact, right? We pattern matched it to something in our past, which is our assumptions. And then we applied our logic, and then boom, we concluded or made a decision. One of the bad habits that we have, because we don't have to do this a lot in the industrial age, right? When you're working with people thinking together, right? If you do not build a habit of sharing what is literally between the fact and all of that crap in between, we share the decision and then we might point out a fact, but we don't share what's in between. And this is a bad habit that once you turn it into a good habit, it is an absolute superpower for the 21st century.
I mean, just the idea that for example, being pessimistic is a bad habit. It's fascinating to me, right? If you think about these big, heavy things, we feel, well, I'm really pessimistic, or I'm really insecure, or maybe I'm really arrogant. To think that those are just an accumulation of bad habits changes it a little bit, right? Because I think we identify being insecure, we identify being more arrogant or confident. And if you actually were trying to get more balanced, to think I just have some bad habits in there that's leading me to that is different than I've got to change like my whole being and it's fascinating.
It's interesting, Mike, this comment you made about, I guess in the PRT group, which is now being called RT, right? So we're upgrading here. Replace assumption with curiosity. Like the caution I would have is this, that's a mental exercise, right? Let's replace, right? This is kind of almost like when I think about promises, right? Kind of pledges, I get it, aha moments. That's just assumption with curiosity. It's interesting, even James Clear talks about this, the 2 steps in building habits. One is the reps and sets. Show up, then you focus on improving it. There's a lot of things that, for example, and the example he uses is a fascinating, extreme example. He talked about this one guy who wanted to go work out in the gym. And so he created a habit to start. Part 1 of the habit building was to drive to the gym and work out 5 minutes only, which sounds insane. How much can you get done in 5 minutes? 5 minutes, workout ends, drives back. And did that repeatedly. You literally drive to the gym just to go 5 minutes and leave. And building the ritual of showing up. Mm-hmm. That's the notion of reps and sets. And once that gets done, then you focus on improving it. But because we see it as one step, like usually our goals and objective side of us want something. Let's go to the gym and have this crunch plan in 21 days to look like Mike Collette, right? And it's like literally like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, and he used the example even on like meditation, right? People start with too big a goal. And the point was, so they train people to meditate for 1 minute. And they're like, is that even worth it? Yeah. Well, when you practice meditating for 1 minute, right? Yeah. Imagine you get good and you meditate for 2 minutes, you're like, wow, 2x the goal. If you try to meditate for 20 minutes and you only got 2 minutes, you'd be like, I really suck. Like this notion of first building in the showing up ritual.
Yes.
Then comes the improvement. And I feel even just like habit building, no different than decision making, that yellow sleeve. If you want to get good in the 21st century skill of thinking power, strategizing, being able to sense make in ambiguous situations and know how to make the most creative solutions and innovations, the decisions, you need a foundation of that 3-5. You need a foundation of the red solid, and then you can do it. But we kind of all want to skip that step, which is why we call that level 1 versus level 2. We all want to go straight to level 2.
Well, Kimmy's saying you need both, right? Long vision and immediate focus to reps and sets. Like you have.
Of course, you need both. But the point is this: try to build it the other way, you'll never succeed.
You'll never, start.
Most of us, industrial age is, the term reverse engineering. Well, we love reverse engineering. And so the problem is our desire for faster ROI or return, right? There's a laziness to us. And now with the speed of information and everything, there's an immediacy that we want to do things. Everyone says, can you give me the 2-minute version? Yeah. Is there a talk for that? That's like 30 seconds. Do I have to listen to do I have to read the whole book, right? Like what's audio book at 1.5 or 2x speed? And can you give me just the section that matters, the Cliff Note version? And what ends up happening as you want to do that is that we start from the goal where we want to go and we want to dial back as little as possible. So meaning we're all looking for the shortcuts, which is why we go to the wrong place when we think that way, versus you have to flip it. Like we thought of teaching an entire class just on how to do strategy really well. But the problem that will happen is this: when you're doing strategy well, there's a whole bunch of automatic that has to be set up and upgrading continuously. The example of Mackie in sports and basketball, right? When you're first learning the dribble, you're watching your hands, you're watching your feet, right? Like dribbling and footwork, right, is the foundation. When you're playing the game, if you're looking at your hands and feet, I mean, I hope you realize any average team will crush you. You couldn't play. Yeah. When you're playing, whether it's basketball or life or anything, you have to be situationally aware. And the greatest area of ambiguity, it's kind of crazy, right? The greatest area of ambiguity is this: it's other people. This is the part. If we just all interfaced and interacted with machines, it's a lot more predictable. But other people, they're not logical. They're irrational. They're like, they'll say they do something and they go on the game or the field or the meeting and they do the total opposite. And you're like, I thought we had a plan. You were going to do that. What? Learning how to be able to read the other players, the who's in the room at any given point, to then read the situation and then figure out how to execute. It's a very hard thing to do.
Sorry, Mackie's saying his wife's learning how to drive at 38 years old and hand over hand turning. It's very scary.
Wow. You could just get autopilot.
Yeah, she might not even need Tesla autopilot. Yeah.
She won't have to even learn that.
That's awesome. Loving my Colette's workout at home. And Colette actually took over the Instagram account today. Kwang, you had a really good question. I thought maybe we would Kwang was asking, how, I don't know if you want to unmute, unless you don't want to ask it.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondering, because I'm thinking of like coaching in the past, like you said, that is like instead of like asking for further reflection, like encourage them to develop good habits. And so I just wondering, like how do you go about encouraging someone to pick up a habit? Like, is it like you're trying to convince that, oh, if you do this in the long term, like let's say like you can share more openly to people around you, then you'll get like better results in the long term with your transparency, or how would you go about it?
If I think I heard your question right, because one of the practices that we bake into NextJump is this: when you get coaching, within one business day, we either have you rewatch the video, what happened, and send a note to your coach of your takeaways, right? And oftentimes share it with the team. What most people on our team failed to see was that it was building a habit. It's almost like, when schools give tests, it's not about the test, even though that's where everyone focuses. Yeah. The test itself made you prep. And so that became an automatic, it's like that half step and dance that occurred because the test was occurring. And then once the test is over, like kind of people feel, like that cortisol level and that fear is gone. You're now absorbing information very differently and building a habit of re-looking at it for the second time, absorbing it and then sharing it. Those are the habits that we're building. And most people think, if I get put up for this, 10X or test, right? Now I have more homework to do. Like what they don't recognize was it's an entire system that's built to actually get you habitualized, that these things that are scheduled as checkpoints are simply to help you build the habit of prepping. And the prepping is where the learning is occurring. And the actual event itself is simply the stress to make shit happen. In fact, real show up, so that you can then reflect and analyze it. And if you analyze it, there's a machine that's built and it's automated and people don't realize what's happening. And that, by the way, is another example of companies spend time deliberately building that system. Individuals go and think that, well, I saw the video, so I got it. Like, what do I have to do? And what I mean is this: it's not that there aren't individuals who know how to take a little snippet and turn it into something that's upgrading permanently. Coaches, companies, well-run programs literally design systems. Because when you do, you'll see that everyone just simply by showing up is automatically upgrading, doing less of the bad things, doing more of the good things. And that, just by the way, this is the crazy part, only sets you up to do what you really need to do to win, which is how do I do Dev GPS 1, 2, 4, meaning how do I think better and then strike with the most innovative, creative solutions, right, in near real time. To do that, the other stuff has to get automated and be continuously upgrading on an automated basis.
I mean, in many ways, the small groups that you guys are in and having a small group, that's the system. In many ways, that's the system where it's creating the opportunity for, because Kwong, the way you wrote the question, I liked it. How would I convince someone it would be helpful for them in the long run to pick up a new habit, right? So you think about how do you convince somebody else, this is good for you, you should do this. I think it's a very hard thing to do unless it's set up every week where there's an opportunity to say, you know, when you did that, something about, it's like, that's where because I think about, you know, just example of my mom, the NQR, the way she hits back at my dad on a certain topic, you know, everybody in the room, I think, can feel it, but nobody has the courage to say, doesn't feel right, you know, like that doesn't feel good. Like, why do you do that? Because it feels like an intervention, right?
But can I tell you one of the things that
saying it'd be a good habit for you to stop doing that, right? Is a hard.
We call it better you, better me. And there's different ways to think of this. Sometimes there are situations you have to teach to realize how little you know, and then you go and actually improve. There are times where oftentimes if you are improving yourself in the arena, it's easier to teach. Like we said, how can we come up with 56 classes, right? Through the course of every week. It's because we're doing a lot of better me and it spills over and we're looking at, okay, what should we spill over on Thursday?
Yeah.
That notion of getting that flywheel going of like, fill my cup and then I spill over. It's what Josh Waiskin years ago called it the difference between an armchair professor, right? And someone who knows it in their bones. People who know it in their bones. God, you want to get mentored by them. You want to learn from them. Those people understand the nuances. They understand the wrong forks, the right forks. They understand the stuff that intellectually sounds good, but in practice, you can practically throw it out. But those who are armchair professors, there's almost a finger wagging nature to telling you, you should know this. And didn't you know the meaning of this? And didn't you do this? And when you look at them, they don't do a lot. They spend more time via finding more jargon and words. And it's like, if you ever have friends who actually, their entire repertoire of communication and conversation seems to be movie liners, like one-liners. Like, I don't know if you have friends like this. I had a friend in college years ago. I swear everything that came out of his mouth seemed to be movie one-liners. And I was like, I want to know what you actually think. You can't just do movie liners nonstop. And you know, when you first hear it, I thought it was so funny. Oh my God, I wish I had those skills. I followed him around and realized, wait, it's the same act everywhere. And I was like, I kind of am curious, is he really funny? Does he have an original point of view? That's what armchair professorship is.
I mean,
like.
you're saying, because Brian Roth, you were saying it's powerful to be vulnerable with the other person. Share some of your journey. How has dialing down a bad habit helped you? That's the example of better me. I'm working on this.
So I look at not even helped you. I start first by tell me how it was challenging. Tell me how it went wrong. Usually the litmus test for a person who knows it in their bones, they can articulate all the ways it was done wrong. The person who's an armchair professor tells you should do this.
Yeah, and that's one
of the litmus tests.
And that can be very annoying.
Someone who knows it in the bones knows more of the wrong ways. And we talked about this, and I don't know if we run a class on this, the power of negation. The wrong way has a higher rate of accuracy than the right way. The right way may have just been the best thing you figured out for now.
Right.
There's constantly a better right, but wrongs tend to have a higher rate of predictability and accuracy that, no, that's bad. Even those are not always certain, but just generally speaking, between the wrong way and the right way, wrong ways tend to be more illustrative and indicative of insights. Scientists and experimenters know this. They celebrate when they figure it out. Oh, definitely don't do it that way.
I think the kid question, Lynn, she's asking if ingraining habits in kids are faster than adults. I feel kids do learn faster, right? Because I think the longer we've been alive on this planet, unlearning our bad habits is harder. The longer you.
Lynn, do you want to unmute Lynn and ask a little bit more depth in your question?
I don't know if you're here, Lynn. If you're here, go ahead and unmute. I don't think she's here, but I think that unlearning, right? The longer we've had that bad habit, it's harder.
So the interesting part about kids too is this: I think people generally will be shocked at how fast we build habits. And I think we all agree speed is a fundamental change in all our lives, right? The speed of information, the speed of reaction, the speed of feedback, the speed of everything. Which means, to me, I believe one of the bigger trends that people aren't really seeing is kids are picking up habits faster than they ever have when we were kids. Like this notion of that's good, do more of it, or that's bad, don't do it. It's occurring at a faster rate, even unbeknownst to them. They're picking up habits at a materially faster rate than we ever did. And so this notion of they're happening unintentionally at times, not aware, not deliberately, and how to help people arm the notion that you can turn it intentional and deliberate to do better, right? To do less bad, do more good.
Mm-hmm. Kimmy's asking, so you just share more of what you know in your bones, right? Is that what you're saying? So the person who, the person who knows in their bones more of the wrong ways, instead of telling them what to do, then just ask more questions, or what is the way of, go ahead, Kimmy, if you want to unmute.
Sorry, yeah, so I was trying to understand, I was thinking about when you were talking about when somebody knows it in their bones, they know a lot of the wrong ways. The professor just sits there and tells them what they should do, and the other person knows it in their bones. So what's the way of the person who knows it in their bones? Instead of telling them the right way to do it, or what is their method?
So like my first reaction, Kimmy, is a lot of times people sort of ask questions so they can say, oh, I'm not an armchair professor because I'm telling you the wrong way, so I must know it in my bones. You'll see tempo usually is one of the best litmus tests for truth or LHF, lying, hiding, faking. Meaning when people tell you information with a very high tempo, right? Generally speaking, there's a lot more truth. So someone who knows something in their bones can almost describe the movie and the things that happen, wrong turn, right turn, try this, try that. There's a sense of tinkering. It's like a person in a lab experimenting. And like I tried this combination and that blew up and this blew up and this stuff. And there's a sense that they're still in the arena, experimenting, driving, living life. An armchair professor tends to have like, well, years ago, now that I've thought about it, right? What I found to be the truth of success and the ways to fail, like there's a difference of kind of even the tone, and word choice tends to also be different. People who tend to be more armchair professor-esque have perfected the language of the exact right words to get you to react the exact right way. And there's a difference where words do matter when you teach. And this is where the difference comes in. When you teach, words matter. But when you are in the arena learning the stuff, intentionality matters more than the words. Meaning, so you get more descriptive, you get more visual, you start to use other analogies like movies and this, and you're almost struggling to describe what's happening, but you're describing stuff and you can tell they have experience. It didn't necessarily go well, or maybe they're not quite sure if it worked well, but they have experience and they're trying to bring you into their mind, and you can almost see through their eyes, you can almost feel their experience. Versus someone who seems to have a buttoned up answer, right? It's about boom. It's about doom, right? It's about 1, 2, 3, right? Like it's too buttoned up. And so, but it's not to say, by the way, like you have people who are really good at the better me, better you cycle. So when someone has to button up, my probing usually is I want to know what's underneath it. How'd you get there? Walk me through. And I start asking a gazillion questions, probing through, and I can tell if they saw someone else and cut and pasted that thought,
if they actually
or
have done
like
it themselves.
if they know what they're talking
about. Tarun, you were mentioning, I don't know if you want to unmute Tarun, about this notion of bad habits, right? And how distraction can create bad habits.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a meeting earlier today as an example, and just like a random uncle turned up to say hello. And there's just so many, I feel working from home has made, there's just more communications, more Slack messages, more emails, more like, I feel I get out the flow a lot easier than I do in the office, like a home delivery, and then it throws me off, and then I just will do bad stuff that I kind of know is not right. Like, you know, if it's just reacting to email or things, but I'll be in a certain headspace, and then I feel like there are more distractions at working from home than there were.
So you know, we saw this in earlier lip classes, but I think about, once again, the dialing down the bad, right? To dial. Remember, it's a dial. It's not an on-off switch. So be careful. People do that. Ignore everyone who rings doorbell, right? Or like, ignore, that's not what it is. You think of it as a dial. Dialed up, down, dial up. We shared at one point, like, even when you get an email, a lot of emails now have this automatic like preview thing that pops up. You can turn that off. Like, if there is an emergency, the people that matter usually know how to get in touch with you. Like, when my phone rings from my wife and it's multiple times ringing, I know something's not right, right? But if I get a text or something, like, most times you can actually not respond right away. The same things that happen on your phone goes bling, 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 like all the little, these are all things that we can dial down and turn off, right? Like, you can be in a meeting and have your phone turned up, or you can have it turned down. There are all these little things that you can do, tiny little ways to dial down, right? What happens. But then there's the flip side we're going to teach next week. And so we'll give you a little preview into this. It's fascinating how most people, when it comes to mental work, thinking work, you work, and then you're like, I'm so exhausted, I need a break, right? So then you go and like, you go for a break, whether it's for a walk or a snack or, you know, whatever it might be. It's different when you're more intentional about recognizing key types of breaks. Highly predictable, right? Breaks. Two of the things that are natural breaks we all have as human beings is eating and going to the bathroom. You can even turn those deliberate. We talk about needing to earn the right to go to a bathroom. I know it sounds crazy, but we'll talk about that more next week. You know, Shayla's like, what are you talking about? You know, there are little things, but even the idea of certain workout, the way we even cook and eat, we were saying, if we plan, because COVID, we learned to cook in the office more and more. If we cooked a crazy meal that took 36 ingredients and takes 45 minutes to cook, you know what happens when you're about to go into that type of chaos and ambiguity? We do the, okay, I got to reset my mind to get ready to go do that. Now I got to do it with someone and argue, right? Like too much, too little, where's their instructions? When you do that, right? Yeah, that is not an oscillation, right? That is like going from one stressful job to another stressful job. When you instead turn things more ritualized, more routine, you can cook the meal even on automatic. And we'll walk through the details of what meals exactly we cook on automatic. The way we do certain workouts, it's on automatic. The way we have sleep meter class. And you know what happens when you know what's coming up is an automatic? In physical fitness, they call it active recovery. It's recovery. It's doing something I need to do, which is to eat or work out or take a meditative sleep class or even go to the bathroom, but they're all active recovery. And because of the predictability, the low variability of what's coming up, we've habitualized ourselves to push on the mental front, on the emotional front leading up to it, which is what we call the hill, the habit of ferocity. Meaning we have trained ourselves knowing that we're about to go and do this, go do a workout, to push harder on things that we're struggling with up to that point, knowing that an active recovery break is coming. It's completely the reverse of what other people generally do.
By the way, I would also say
we'll go into more detail.
One thing we can dial down to that I think people don't do deliberately enough, if you're about to go into like important thinking work, don't send a bunch of emails on others. I think one of the mistakes people make is I want to clear out all this other administrative stuff because I've got to get to my important work. So let me just do that real quick. Well, once you trigger off all those emails while you're trying to do really important work, that stuff is coming in and you don't realize you made that happen. You made that happen. We all do it. It's awful. You have to train yourself. Don't do that because they're going to respond to you. And then you know what you want? A little hit of dopamine. I want to open that email and see what Laura said about the flagship conference room that we spent a year trying to put. I want to read that email and I want to see the couch that's going to be in my office. I want to see it. Well, then I just did that. I did that. I just did that.
We do it all the time.
As opposed to like, I get so many emails. I'm like, no, I created that. Now, could she email me separately without me? Yes. But why contribute to it? You know what I mean? Like you can control that. And I think we think, well, oh, it's just so many emails, so many Slacks. And you don't really peel back and be like, did I start that one? You know, Or did I feed into that one? It's because it feels good. It's a little hit of dopamine every time you see the little message.
Think about
come
this.
up,
So
even if it's stressful.
we're not physically stuck.
Yeah.
We're not like in quicksand, physically stuck, but we get mentally stuck all the time, right? And when you're mentally stuck and you fired up a bunch of emails, right? You want to get unstuck, right? No one likes being stuck. So how do you get unstuck? Oh, I just read with a response. I just want to take a look.
Yeah.
You might respond, and
Yeah.
another one comes back.
Ugh,
Like, whose fault was
whose
that?
fault is that?
Well, this is the part. Was it really I didn't do it deliberately. Was it accidental? And we do it so automatically, right? It's like you see people who are trying to come up with breakthroughs and they're doing some important stuff, but they don't know. And so the idea of how do you get unstuck when you're stuck, not physically, but mentally, right?
Yeah.
And if you start to really audit and spend time, and we spend a ton of time coaching different levels of people, you will see their setup is literally the most lethal thing imaginable, right? With every little sound and ding and whatnot to get like distracted, to procrastinate. You need to solve this thing that's important, but I have set myself up with little ringers and dingers and little chips and this and everything. You would almost think that they deliberately set up to fail, to have breakthrough thinking on something that's really difficult. It literally, if you look at it, it almost looks like some enemy came in and deliberately set them up so they would never succeed. And yet it's not. No one did it in some intentional way.
Right.
We just didn't put deliberate thought into it. You know, James Clear talks even about, it's interesting when you think of how we consume news, think of things like Twitter or social media, right? Think of who you follow. Like whatever they say and share, pictures, whatnot, influences and gets access to the root of our brain, of our mind share. Who'd you follow this person? Why?
Yeah.
Oh, they follow me, follow them back. Or, you know, I just kind of left it. We don't curate, we don't go through.
Feel like a slave to what it is,
And
victim to it.
there are people we follow on social media that make us more stressed, that make us more anxious, that make us feel more inferior. They do bad things, yet we just leave them, right?
Yeah.
We decided to invite them to our mind share and we just leave it. Versus like we have the ability to curate it. And he talked even about the notion of bulking up and then trimming down, right? I'll add more followers, interesting, and then I'll watch them and then, you know, no good, don't like it. Too much noise, not enough signal, not unique enough, cut them out. The notion of that level of intentionality. Like,
I can't wait sort of for next week as we think about this over the next week of actually documenting all the changes that we've made since pre-COVID to now. Just how we get up in the morning, what I put on for work, how my routine, everything has changed. Everything's changed because it's a different environment now. But it's been intentional. I think being that intentional, realizing why does this feel right or why does this feel wrong, and being aware of that. It's like being hyper aware of what's influencing you, what's good for you, what's bad for you. So we're going to spend a lot more time on that.
And by the way, this is one of the things, team is critical. And one of the key things that almost none of these researchers talk about is team at a fundamental, in fact, I would say the root primary level. We'll go back to an original slide we made a while back in LIP. Most people focus on the content. And then they might say, okay, let's make a ritual. The last thing you think about is a team. The right way to operate in this new century. Right team comes first, then comes the ritual, content is last. Content can almost be irrelevant if you get the right team. And so the right team is to ultimately get to, and this is, remember, the end point, a team of 2 is the fastest, most effective. But it's so hard to find the right one. We try to go to 4, which is what we tried, but because even that's hard, we shoot for 10. That's why these small groups got created. The likelihood, remember, the most optimal team usually has 3 things in there, right? Someone who's better than you, so you can learn from. Someone who's worse than you, so you can teach. And someone who's at the same level, so you can compete. The likelihood of you finding that, you can find it in just a team. I mean, you should see the 2 of us. Like, there, we flip-flop roles in being teacher or student or competition, everything imaginable, right? But the likelihood of finding that is higher if you have a group of 10. 10 being directional. It could be small as 6, 8, could be as big as 12, 14, but like at some point it's too big, right? But we go there, but with the intention of finding a way to drill down to the optimal set of what could be 4, it could be 2. And so some of the announcements, we'll announce more next week, is we're going to help you do that. We're going to pump in some money to help you actually form team better in these small groups. I think somewhere between $100 to $150 per person to help you form team, whether it's workouts, whether it's social hours. So we're going to add that in. So we're testing it first at Next Jump this week. By next week, we will institute that. So think of that as an extra freebie from Next Jump to help you experience this better. But yes.
Shayla, I don't know what you mean by habits that are cultural. Yes, of course, there are habits that are cultural. I don't know which ones specifically. I agree that habits can be cultural and it's hard to break them. I don't know if there's something specific that you wanted to bring up, but I just noticed you're welcome, Maggie. It's always good seeing you. All the knowledge.
Yeah, Shayla, what do you mean by cultural?
Mostly, I grew up in India, then brought up here, and then my children, like, they tell me I have bad habits. So I don't know it's a bad habit or it's a cultural thing. For an example, like growing up in India is like anything that's on the floor, like money, paper, or things like that. We don't step on it. We walk on a barefoot and then we pick up. And then so even now, subconsciously, if I see a paper on the floor, I don't want anybody to step on it. I pick up, and my kids go, "Mom, you have a bad habit. You have OCD." And I said, well, that's just the way I was brought up, and that's the norm that was taught growing up. And so I'm like, subconsciously, I try not to do that in front of others sometimes because of what my kids say. But I don't know, it's a bad habit or a good habit. That's one of the examples. It's like there's a lot of norms that I had growing up, but my kids feel that's a bad habit.
So can I tell you what the honest thoughts that go through my head? One is I can't tell if Shayla's trying to humble brag because that sounds like a good habit. Or I can't tell if your kids are trying to manipulate you. Yeah. Basically, they don't want to clean up around the house, so they're trying to pin that as a bad habit. I'm not sure which one it is, but the way I look at it is this. I think generally that's a good habit. I mean, I hope of all the bad habits you have examples of, that's not the worst one.
I was like, oh my God.
Because if that's your worst of bad habits, then I would generally say not a lot of awareness, because we all have bad habits. And the bad ones are real bad. Mm-hmm. Like, not like, I clean, right? Like I pick up trash is not generally. Now, unless you like to go on the street where there's all kinds of coronavirus and that you're doing it, then you know what, like, okay, maybe like there are places where it's not the best thing to do, right? Germs everywhere, and mom by default just puts their open hand into trash and germs. Okay, like I understand some of that, right? But I don't think that's the example we're talking. So yeah, I think so I don't know which of that is, but yes, without question, culturally, right? I mean, in Korean culture, we're all about force feeding, right? When someone says no, it just means that they really want it. They just don't know how to say yes. So you are not only trying to push the food, you are trying creative ways to then cut it smaller, shove it in their mouth.
I don't like it. Like, you're going to eat it.
And you can imagine the difference. Megan, I mean, so my favorite food.
If you're still here, you'd like to hear this kind of stuff.
So when Megan was an intern, right? Like this is going years, 20 something years. Like I was like, my favorite food is curry, right? And of all the curries, I love Japanese curry. I was like, you've never had curry? Oh my God.
I grew up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. We ate like steak and like potatoes and Italian and pastas, and don't think I ever had curry, never even heard of curry. Just
I was like, oh my
so
God.
Sheltered.
It's almost like,
I don't know what curry is, but he's the CEO and he wants me to try it. Oh dear God.
It's like a child that never tasted gummy bears or cotton candy. I'm like, oh my God, right? This is like how deprived. So of course I go home that night, make a giant bowl of curry, come back the next day to work with this like custom made curry, like lunch pack.
This Irish Italian girl's never
open it. I'm like, try it. She's like, no, I think I'd rather not. I'm like, come on, it's so good.
I've got like my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm just trying to eat. I'm an intern and I just want to go home. Stop.
So I put it into one scoopful. Just try that. You'll see once it hits your mouth. Oh my God, won't try it. So then I like take a bite. I'm like, oh my God, it's so good. You got to try it. Temperature too hot. Like, do you want it spicy? I remember
being like, I can't get out of this.
And I couldn't understand.
Like, have to try it. Like he is I mean, I remember thinking relentless. Like this is, and then you went into the whole, you made it. Like, how could you not try it? And then you were getting mad. And I remember being like, gonna ask you to make this, but I feel ungrateful
What
now.
was supposed to be an act of
I-
kindness
Oh,
turned into a really bad
it literally
situation.
created a fight for like
where,
a decade, I
Like,
swear.
you know, she really means no. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're being so closed-minded. So it got into a character discussion. I was like, wow,
You wonder
that's
how we're still friends.
a bad habit. Yes. No.
Yeah,
yes, that
bad habit to
came-
force feed people. It's not good. It's not good.
Yes. No. And you see this. I mean, I see Yunsky here. Like, we know how
Yeah.
Koreans are. It's like you say no and they actually mean yes. Right. And it's really confusing, by the way. Right. Like, oftentimes you
Well,
do
Kim
want
was
it.
saying that in Indian culture too, if one scoop of the food, it means you want to. This little kid still there. I can't remember. There's something that I was like, what are you talking
No,
about?
no,
You're-
I faced the
you're-
flip side. I mean, I love to eat, and I've gone to friends' houses and whatnot. Like, you know, when you go to Italian, like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I mean, it's like they bought the whole grocery store and tried to cook everything in the same day. It's like
Yeah.
so much food.
Yeah.
And I wanted to eat all of it, like 5
Yeah.
times.
Right.
And so when they offered and I said no, they were like, oh, he doesn't want it. And I was like, I should mean yes, though. How do
Yeah.
I change my mind here?
Yeah.
Like, you know, that was a bad habit, right? Culturally, I needed to learn to be
Sorry, I
direct.
think it's funny. Is it Chenya? He's saying the issue off subject, but Megan looks like an MMA fighter. No means no. Yes, like I have. So my bad habit, I can get very hot-headed. It's an Italian thing. I know other people can do, but it's without question. I feel like it's in my blood. My dad, the Italian. My maiden name was Lombardi. I mean, the drama and the. Yes, I feel like our last boxing instructor told me I look like a street fighter. I could be a street fighter. I could kick your. But I couldn't tell him I don't want to try the damn curry. I don't like it. I don't want it. I tried it. I didn't like it. I don't want it. Period. Just over and done. No, I
To this day,
lived
you
with
still
this
haven't
fight for
tried
like
curry, right?
I've tried curry.
I don't
like
know
it.
this. If you ever
You know
see,
what?
if you ever see a Megan bite,
Megan-
it is
well,
literally the
because
equivalent of a insect taking a
It
sample of
doesn't make
something.
sense to me to try a big bite of something when you've never tried it. The whole point is to
Unless it's the
taste
best
it.
thing in the world.
You taste it, and if you like it, you eat more. Okay. Oh yes.
Megan,
Definitely.
I mean, I used to be very bad at trying food because I was very, very picky. But then maybe 10 years ago, that I have come across a slogan or something, try a teaspoonful of everything. You may be surprised that you will acquire,
Yeah, I mean,
find something
I've
very
heard-
tasty that you would never tasted in your life. Your taste buds
Nice,
pick up.
nice. I eat sushi. I do it all now. I just curry. Doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
I
the
don't
sushi
like
took a
it.
long time.
Sushi took a long time.
Like,
And
I'm
I
thinking-
don't do sashimi. I do like the rolls, but I do spicy tuna.
Yeah, and you like it.
Huh?
You like
And
it,
I
right?
just started having a little bit of banana in the acai bowl through coconut.
Interesting.
Banana I have not, because
It's a long story
it's a
now.
long story why I do not like
Yes.
banana. The smell that makes me gag. But I just started realizing it's in my coconut acai bowl. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna keep going with it, even though I know it's there. And I broke through, guys.
That's it.
It's all about. It's not
I
about
kn-
that, but it's about that. It's a bad
I will
habit,
do a
yeah.
teaspoon of curry in her side
Oh
bowl
my-
and she'll learn to like.
Yeah,
curry.
yeah. See, bad habits. I love how Yunsky's in Korea right now. It's 2 a.m. Wow,
getting hungry.
Yunsky, how cool that you're with us at 2 a.m. You have to go make some Japanese curry. Is that what they get?
Delicious,
Just tell me
delicious.
next time you come. You
It
tell
is
me. You
delicious.
tell me if you like that.
I personally like the medium spicy one, but it's just delicious. Delicious.
Well, it was fun spending time
Nonetheless.
with you guys. We'll definitely get into more of this next week. We're gonna get more in depth and
Yeah.
habit building, and Yunsky loves it. He's gonna come with curry.
Yeah,
next week or
come with
something.
food next time. 2
What
a.m.
the heck
We're
is
told that's a bad
chirashi?
thing.
What's chirashi? What's chirashi, Karen? What is that? What is chirashi?
Of course, I'm like, I'd like to try it. Megan's like,
We should do
"Oh,
it. We
no."
should do a class.
There's a
We
difference.
all-
We're so opposite.
I'd like to try
Like,
it.
remember that time I went to the op site and everyone's like, so we're
See,
like,
this is
no,
literally
no, like-
baggage here.
no,
Thanks,
no.
guys, for the baggage.
no, but it's like this little stick where you
sushi,
light on
coconut.
fire. So who wants to put fire into their mouth, right, to pull it out? And like, and then you write a slogan in the thing, right? Whatever you want, because you have to conquer whatever defines you. My slogan on that fire stick was try shit. So this is the part,
Opposite
like
of me.
we're complete opposites in the front and
But if you try everything, you get sick. You should
Yeah.
see the pizza he eats on Friday night. I mean, literally everything is on it. And it's just like, I would get sick if I did that. When I was younger, I used to be able to do that. Now I get heartburn if I have like a piece of
just
pepperoni.
on my defense, I grew up in Nigeria. It's a third world country. This pizza place that you put unlimited toppings, like truly unlimited.
And I just get cheese.
Why would you go for the cheap pizza when you can go and get like the equivalent of 5 pizzas? in
Because
one?
there's something amazing about cheese and sauce. And if they do it right, a pizza with just cheese and sauce in the south of France and in Italy, that's all you need. You don't need all the other crap. It ruins it. And then you can't even taste the goodness, the bread and the cheese and the sauce.
My
It's
pizza,
about the sauce,
my
Charlie.
pizza is like a side of meatballs with a salad on top and a
I
lot of
make the best
condiments
pizzas.
with some hot honey and
I
other.
make my
It's
own
just,
pizza.
wow.
Come to my
Sorry,
house.
you're making me probably
Come
hungry.
to my house. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you were here, you could have our turkey chili. We made it yesterday,
Yes.
2 days ago. Our turkey chili. We'll give you guys the recipe. Charlie
We'll
found it.
give the
It's
recipe,
easy. It takes us 10 minutes, and we eat it for 2 days straight. It's
which
fantastic.
doesn't sound so great. But it's delicious.
It's delicious.